But there was a recent article I want you to actually react to, how Ansarallah rattled the U.S. Navy and transformed maritime war. Here you have the Wall Street Journal acknowledging that Ansarallah engaged the U.S. Navy in the fiercest battles it's fought since World War II, despite being one of the world's poorest countries. And then it said here, some 30 vessels participated in combat operations against Ansarallah on the Red Sea from late 2023 up until this year, and rained down 1.5 billion worth of munitions on Ansarallah. And while they claim that they destroyed much of the arsenal, that's very, very much under question, given that Ansarallah continues what it is doing. It says that the U.S. Navy was not able to achieve the strategic goal of restoring shipping through the Red Sea. You have Israel kind of in this very unhinged state. It's bombing Lebanon. Of course, it's continuing its onslaught in Gaza. Yet, it seems to be mired in many fronts, and Yemen happens to be one of the biggest ones right now.
Yes, and I think if we go back to when Trump began this genocidal onslaught against Yemen, which is the only Arab state that has been supporting the Palestinian cause in a meaningful way. Ansarullah is a part of the government. They are the government that rules in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, and they are the legitimate power in Yemen, even though the UN Security Council does not recognize them at the behest of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. But they have been in power for a decade now, over a decade. You recall that when this attack began, and it was all done to support the Israeli regime, the Wall Street Journal, after a period of time, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, yes, and they admitted that the United States was unable to destroy the underground facilities of Ansarullah. And we saw from the leaked signal chats that were carried out between American officials that they were targeting civilians in their airstrikes. If you recall, they said the head of the guy who was the head of the missile force, they never named the person. They just said that he entered a building and we brought down the whole building. All the people living in that apartment building were slaughtered because of some person that they claimed was the head of the missile command, and a person who they couldn't name. And Ansarullah ultimately stated that by the end of the conflict, none of their commanders were martyred. The Americans had failed across the board. And the Wall Street Journal back then admitted that the US failed to destroy their underground facilities, and they were only able to damage the entrance points, which were immediately rebuilt. Then the New York Times later on admitted that I never read the article because it was behind the paywall, but it was said that they wasted $7 billion in this month-long campaign. I don't think that included the F-18s that fell into the Red Sea or the drones. So the real cost could have been a lot more. The United States failed against Yemen and they had to capitulate. Trump said Yemen capitulated, but when we saw what really happened, it was clear, even the Americans admitted that it was the United States that capitulated. And I think that this was a major victory. The West likes to say that the resistance has been defeated on all fronts, and that the Israeli regime has been able to expand its power. But I think that's propaganda and wishful thinking. What happened in Yemen, I think, was the greatest defeat for the United States, really since Vietnam. It was brief, but it was humiliating. The United States went to war against Yemen. They engaged in war. Trump and his Secretary of Defense promised to crush what they call the Houthis or Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces and the Yemeni government. And all they did basically was slaughter civilians in different cities. They failed completely to deter Yemen. If they had success, they would have continued with the onslaught. They would have continued with it for 2, 3, 4 months until they finished the job. But it was clear that they had failed completely. In Lebanon is significant in that the Israeli regime, while it's carried out a new wave of bombings on civilian targets, and it was clear they were all civilian targets. They were just apartment blocks. The bombing was carried out of spite and hatred for human life, and using Hezbollah as an excuse. And we saw how the Western media basically repeated whatever the Israelis said, that they were striking Hezbollah targets. I know those neighborhoods. Those are all people's homes. They destroyed between 100 to 200 apartments. 100 to 200 families are now permanently displaced. Kids who are in the middle of their exams near the end of the school year. During the Eid vacation, where people came from abroad to visit, they created chaos across southern Beirut simply out of spite. But it shows that the Israelis have not succeeded in Lebanon. And in Lebanon, by the way, another victory for the resistance were the local elections. In the local elections, Hezbollah and its allies won across the board. After this devastating war, after this genocidal war, the fact that the resistance is so popular in Lebanon, despite what the Americans and the Europeans and the Israelis and their local partners, their genocidal fascist partners in Lebanon tried, they failed. So in Yemen, the resistance won the war. In Lebanon, the resistance is alive and well. And in Syria, it is a sad state of affairs. But at least the reality is being exposed to many who, for whatever reason, failed to see the reality. And that is that what happened in Syria was a conspiracy, regardless of the nature of the previous government. Iran was never a fan of the Ba'athist Party, whether in Syria and obviously in Iraq. We fought Saddam Hussein, and the Ba'athist Party in Iraq invaded Iran. So Iran was never in love with the Baathism. But Iran saw what the Americans and NATO were doing, how they were conspiring to bring down Lebanon, how they were conspiring to bring down the resistance in Lebanon and to destroy the bridge to the resistance in Lebanon, as well as the bridge to the resistance in the West Bank. So this black hole that is now Syria, which is now a black hole, sadly, and where people are suffering, I think that in the long run, this is going to be more costly for the Israeli regime. They are overstretched in Syria. And for the collaborators who brought about this horrific state of affairs, it's going to be very costly as well. And they have vindicated the resistance. They've vindicated Hezbollah and its allies. People now see what happened in Syria was exactly what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was saying would happen.
There have been reports over the last a recent period of possibly a new resistance emerging in Syria as well. I know firing rockets into the Syrian territory, Golan, but Israeli occupied Syrian territory.
Yeah, just to say that I think when there is occupation and colonialism, resistance is inevitable. And, in the US and Israeli view of the world, or at least what they claim to believe, the reason there is conflict and bloodshed and there is no peace is because Hamas and Hezbollah, evil organizations that exist just to hate Jews and kill and cause chaos for the sake of causing chaos. But the reality, of course, is most people will know, is that Hezbollah was created as a reaction to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, the murder of tens of thousands of people, and it was an indigenous resistance group that grew up. And that's exactly the same with Hamas. Hamas emerged in the late 1980s in Gaza in opposition and resistance to decades of brutal Israeli occupation. And the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, also, and its different factions, emerged as a resistance to Israel at an earlier phase, when the PLO essentially became subcontractors of the Israeli occupation. Resistance didn't disappear. Resistance reemerged in the form of other organizations. So suppose a genie comes out of a bottle and, Benjamin Netanyahu rubs the bottle and says, and the genie comes out and says, "What's your wish?" And Netanyahu says, "My wish is that Hezbollah and Hamas disappear," and poof, they're gone. Well, maybe Israel will get calm for a very short period of time until new resistance groups emerge. And so that's what will happen in Syria. That's what will happen in Lebanon. For political reasons, Hezbollah has decided not to respond militarily to Israel's constant aggressions. It's not that Hezbollah can't respond, it can respond, but as part of the ceasefire deal, the one-sided ceasefire deal that the Lebanese government signed and agreed with Israel, as sponsored by the United States and France and whoever else, Hezbollah agreed to step back and say to the Lebanese state, to the government, okay, you're in charge. You get our land back, because, of course, Israel still occupies Lebanese territory along the border and continues to attack Lebanon and violate its airspace daily, including the massive barbaric terror attacks carried out by Israel last night in the southern suburbs of Beirut. So Hezbollah said to the Lebanese state, go ahead. Go ahead. It's all yours. Now, I can imagine a point where if the Israeli aggression continues to escalate, where Hezbollah may decide that position is untenable. But if they sit it out too long, other people in Lebanon will start to resist and to say, we can't tolerate the attacks on our territory. So the root cause of all violence is the aggression, is the colonial occupation, is the attack from Zionism against the people of this region and their land. And as long as that attack, as long as that original aggression continues and persists and is backed by, of course, when people in the region are resisting against Israel, they're resisting against the might of the entire West. And so as long as that attack continues, then there will be resistance. And that's just a reality. And in the past, in Palestine, it was called the Palestine Liberation Organization. That's no longer a resistance movement in any form. And today it's called Hamas or Islamic Jihad or, the other smaller factions that are involved in the resistance. Today in Lebanon, it's Hezbollah. But if Hezbollah doesn't return to military resistance for any reason, I suspect that other military resistance organizations will emerge. And so the same is true in Syria. You can have a Jolani, a British-American intelligence asset, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, aka Ahmed al-Shara, who has been crowned as king of Syria by the Western intelligence services. And he can pledge, as he has been doing repeatedly, that we don't want any trouble with Israel. We don't want anyone to attack Israel. Please, please, please just leave us alone. But there are Syrians who will rise up and say, this is our land, and we cannot tolerate this aggression, this occupation, this humiliation. And so we are going to resist, even if the American installed monarch in Syria, the king of Syria, or the king of Damascus, decides he doesn't want to resist.
Yemen has recently fired one of its Palestine hypersonic 2 missiles at Ben Gurion Airport. Of course, there was the moment not too long ago where one struck and pierced the Iron Dome, but they keep firing the ballistic missiles and the hypersonic missiles, and they keep having an effect of shutting down the airport and, of course, causing economic dislocation and disarray. And then you have, I don't know if you saw the reports too, of a new Islamic resistance front in Syria that had recently fired rockets into Israeli occupied Golan. Is this all for naught? Because I think a lot of people are very pessimistic about the situation when you have Israel raising Gaza, the genocide, the massive infrastructure destruction, the aid weaponization, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation debacle, luring Palestinians into essentially to their deaths, shooting them down as they were receiving this pitiful amount of aid.
Well, I think it's important also to clarify that what the resistance in Lebanon is protecting is the entire region. Why is Israel so obsessed with getting to the Litani River? Because it wants to control the water sources of the region. Now, what did Jolani facilitate by allowing Israel to occupy Syria the way it has, this king of Damascus? He has facilitated Israel controlling 40% of Syria's water, Israel controlling Al Wahda Dam, which supplies water to Jordan. Now, let's not forget that Jordan is actually one of the poorest countries in the world water-wise. So now, through the occupation of Syria, Israel has a further control on this poodle in Amman that they control. Now, in terms of the case of the other aspect, you have to remember that Israel occupied the highest point in the entire region in Syria, and so therefore has this strategic full spectrum visibility of the region. It's always wanted to get to that mountaintop, and it did. Now, in response to some of what you said, yes, you have the development of this Kataib al-Dhaif in Syria who have shot these weapons from the Golan Heights. You also have to remember that the Yemenis said to the former Syrian government, let us come and open the front. This is following the Al-Aqsa flood. They said, let us come and open the front, and they were prevented from doing so. At least that is my understanding of what happened from some in Yemen. But also, one other thing that I've noticed is there is a coordination playing out across the axis of assistance in the region. They are trying to astroturf anti-resistance feeling. Why is it that on the same day you had Mahmoud Abbas come out, this Israeli spy, this filthy killer and torturer to death of Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, came out with the statement. He said, "Sallimu al-raha'in ya awlad al-kalb." He said, give up the hostages, you sons of dogs. This is what Mahmoud Abbas said. On the very same day, Al-Jolani arrests the leadership of Islamic Jihad in Syria. Not long after that, he arrests Talal Naji from the PFLP. The same period, the Jordanian government outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood, which is essentially about targeting Hamas. So all of that happens on the same day or within days of each other. So this is the axis of assistance, which in the region is pushing to astroturf these anti-resistance ideas. Who remembers the reports that Al Arabiya, the Saudi channel, were putting out about the leadership of Palestinian resistance factions? And then the reaction from the Iraqis when they went down and they shut down Al Arabiya. They are trying as much as they can to warp people's perceptions of this entire situation. They are trying to give the mood music for Israel to carry out this genocide on the Palestinians. And look at Yemen. Look at what Yemen has contributed to humanity. When you even look at the Convention on Genocide, you have very clearly laid out the basis at which an intervention should take place. Yemen has launched the most humanitarian of humanity, the most humane of humanitarian interventions that we've ever seen. When the resistance in Lebanon was directly engaging the Israeli enemy. What were they striking? They were striking military targets. They were striking military targets. There was a point when they struck a house of Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah. Frankly, as somebody who has an arrest warrant, well, who is believed by the International Criminal Court and wanted for for the crime of genocide, that is a legitimate target. Yeah. So really what you've seen is the resistance forces in the region carry out their engagement in this with far greater respect for international humanitarian law than any of the other actors that we're talking about. We're talking about high-tech savagery and barbarism visited upon poor, starving people. And actually, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, these aid sites, they are disappearing Palestinians on a daily basis. They are baiting them so they can be massacred en masse. And I am certain they are being used to try and bully and intimidate and torture Palestinians into some form of collaboration. And it's the direct use of food for political purposes. That's certainly what's happening at these sites. And I do believe there's greater Gulf involvement, even in terms of the mercenary groups that are manning some of the checkpoints. Videos have come out of some of them. Some of the individuals have been Egyptian. Some of the individuals have been speaking in Gulf Arabic. There's a video I've seen of one speaking with an Iraqi accent. Where are these people coming from? What's happening here exactly? And so, you know, all of that will come out as time goes on. The extent of collaboration that all of this has entailed.
I understand why some people are pessimistic, and people raise these issues often, but I don't feel that that is really a valid belief. I think that the resistance obviously is always going to face great difficulty. You have an alliance behind Israel that has been controlling world affairs for centuries, and since the Second World War, the United States has had an empire that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, literally became universal. And as both Ali and Lowkey have pointed out, you have regional countries that have been collaborating. They've been cooperating in one form or another. So in Lebanon, for instance, many people think that Hezbollah is the government. Hezbollah has never been the government. Lebanon is a country where the United States and the Europeans and these regimes that collaborate with the West, either as part of NATO or as a part of their regional alliances, they have huge influence, and they have NGOs and spies and embassies that have always been working against the resistance. Unlike in Yemen, where Ansar Allah is in control of much of, or most of the country, which has a significant population. And unlike in Gaza, where Hamas is in control of has always been in control of that territory, Lebanon is not like that. Lebanon is a deeply divided country, and the United States has fascist allies in Lebanon, which are always stabbing the resistance in the back. The Hezbollah accepted the ceasefire because Lebanon was divided. And there are strong elements. There are people in parliament in Lebanon who support Israel. There are people in parliament and in government who want to see Hezbollah bombed. That's how divided the country is. The majority is with the resistance, according to polls, according to election results, but it's still deeply divided. In the West, we know where they stand. We know where the oil and gas-rich countries in the Persian Gulf stand. Don't be fooled by some television outlet that supports the Palestinians in Gaza. In the broader picture, they're in the American camp. All of these countries are in the American camp. So it's very difficult for Hezbollah. It's very difficult for Ansar Allah to do more than what it is doing. It's under siege. It's being starved. And of course, Hamas is in a terribly difficult position along with its allies like Islamic Jihad. But I agree with what Ali is saying. Resistance is not going to go away. What the Israeli regime is actually doing in Lebanon is that it's strengthening Hezbollah because it is showing that those who put forward the argument to fool the population that the Lebanese state, in cooperation with the United States, will end Zionist aggression, the ceasefires prove that that's nonsense. Even now, we're seeing for the first time last night, the president and even the prime minister, who's the prime minister of Lebanon, who's more than pro-American, even they have had to take a stand. So the country, the population, those who are sort of in the middle are seeing that the issue is not Hezbollah. The issue is that Zionism is an ideology which does not accept peace. It does not accept borders. It only believes in domination and supremacism. So what Netanyahu is doing is that he's ultimately strengthening Hezbollah. Hezbollah is preparing itself. There's no doubt. And the same is true in Syria. They've occupied key areas in Syria, but people in Syria are not going to accept that. If the new regime that's come to power, this regime that's been installed by the West and its regional clients, if this regime fails to retake Syrian territory, all of those territories that have been occupied by the Israeli regime, then it will lose its legitimacy in the eyes of those who saw it to be legitimate, or those who want it to be legitimate, or those who are willing to wait and see if they're going to take back or that territory is going to be taken back. These areas now occupied by the Israeli regime in Syria are the most important parts of Syria. They are the most important parts of Syria. And of course, it adds to the threat against Hezbollah because Hezbollah is now surrounded on its eastern flank as well. They'll manage, but in any case, this land is very, very important. So this situation in Syria is not going to be sustainable. And all these terrorist groups that are under this umbrella organization controlled by Jolani, they're going to turn against one another for a host of different reasons. And people are going to see how fanaticism and these groups, many of them foreigners from Central Asia and China and elsewhere, that they are more busy suppressing Syrians rather than taking back territory taken by the Israeli regime. So in the short term, the Israelis may have success in Syria, but in the long term, I think actually they are proving to everyone that they are the problem. And what they are doing is actually, in the long run, I think, going to take away the tools that the West and regional oil and gas-rich dictatorships use to divide the region. Sectarianism, racial hatred, and other means through which they keep the region divided. Remember, all of these countries are in the American camp. All of them. Whatever, whether it's the Emirates or the Qataris, which despise each other, they're still in the American camp. Whether it's Turkey or Saudi Arabia, which despise each other or dislike each other, they're still in the American camp. The American camp is the problem. It is the United States that's the problem. But I think it's becoming clear to everyone that the region cannot live with Zionism. And not only is this true about the people in the region, but it's true about people across the world. The Israeli regime has exhausted itself. The resistance continues in Palestine. The resistance is fighting back in Yemen. The resistance in Lebanon is rebuilding itself. The American, Israeli, NATO project in Syria is bound to fail. Hatred towards the regime is overwhelming across the region. One of the things that I find so fascinating, so extraordinary, is that none of these despotic regimes, or none of these regimes that are facilitating the genocide or that are accommodating the genocide, none of them are, if they took a stand against the regime, the Israeli regime, they would be the most, it would create popularity for them among their populations. Imagine if Turkey took a stand. Imagine if Egypt took a stand. Imagine if any other country in the region took a stand. If the Emirates took a stand. The leaders in these countries, regardless of the nature of their regimes, they would have the overwhelming majority of the people behind them, because this is a cause that now everyone believes in. Beyond the region, everyone believes in. So I think that in the long run, this is it's working against the Israeli regime, and it's working against the collaborators who cooperate with the regime. It's working against the West. It's working. The Israeli regime has lost its legitimacy across the world. People look down at Zionism. People look with disgust at what they do, whether it's in China or in Central Asia or in Latin America. The new polls that have come out that I think Ali has done an article on, they indicate how badly things are going for the Israeli regime. So I think we should remain optimistic. The axis of resistance is very much active. The axis of resistance will continue to grow, and the broader resistance that goes beyond the axis of resistance, the global resistance, is on the rise. I'm very confident about the future, that these are dark days. What we're seeing on the ground is very painful, but I think that ultimately the Israeli regime has sealed its fate. It is not going to last.